Thank you, Laura, for being here with me today. I'm really excited about having a conversation with you.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Michelle.
Well, I always like to start by going backwards.
Mhm.
And education is such a big word, and it exists all over the place in our workplaces, in our homes, and of course in formal schooling. And when we investigate your relationship to education as a practice and as, philosophical principles, I want to first better understand what your experience was with education as a child. Like, when you went to school, like, did you love school? Was school something that you always enjoyed? Or was it like, oh my God, the system is so broken already? You knew that as a child.
Yeah, no, I was the uber nerd, Michelle. I was painfully shy as a child, actually, and incredibly introverted. And I was an incredibly good student. So I did my work. I worked hard, but I would never say anything in class. My goodness, I was just very book smart. And I think that's what I imagined education to be for a very long time. And then when I was 13, my parents divorced. And that was a real turning point for me because I got quite angry about the whole thing. And I announced to them one day that if you get divorced, I'm moving to Germany. And they told me to have a really nice time. So it was a horrifying moment for me because I realized that I was going to have to do it. I was actually going to have to follow through. And so I joined an exchange program and I got on a plane. And I landed in Frankfurt and spent a year in Freiburg on an exchange in a German school. And it was the hardest year of my life. But I think that's when, you know, I'm my mind really opened up to what real education could be. It's not just sitting in a classroom. It's not just reading books. It's about pushing yourself, getting out of your comfort zone, tapping into skills and abilities that you never knew you had because they were not tested on a test at the end of a class. And that really shaped the person that I am today. I am a completely different person. I am no longer a personality donor. I have continued to push myself in different ways. And each time I have moved to a new country, I've tested myself in different ways that has really shaped my professional world and not just my personal world.
So let's continue down that pathway. Where did your experience, or professional or otherwise, take you after that year? You were transformed. You're still an adolescent at that point. You had to come home, but it sparked something in you. It sparked a career trajectory, and a desire for travel as well. I would assume.
Absolutely. So at that point, I didn't have an idea as to what I wanted to do professionally. But it whet my appetite for travel and the things that I could learn through travel. And so that first year when I was 16, I went on the exchange to Germany. Because I was a nerd, I finished high school a year early, and I ended up going to France with one of those working holiday work permits. I worked there for a bit, traveled all through Europe, came back ready for university, and ended up at Queen's, where I studied language. And that was kind of the continuation of me understanding that I could learn things by learning about different cultures and learning about the world. And so that really gave me an opportunity and a reason to continue those travels and continue learning in that way, which seemed to feed my soul in a way that I really hadn't experienced in the classroom before. And so
You say too that
yeah.
that the learning, I want to just double click on this idea of being uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely.
You had said it about the Germany experience, and then you say it about going through, diversity and putting yourself in these positions that are difficult.
Absolutely.
And that's so much about what learning is, or where education is. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that learning and education happens, or is exponentially potentially more powerful, or neurobiologically, more retained in moments where we are in a different place or uncomfortable?
Yeah. I think, and I can't speak for everyone, but when I am in my comfort zone, I'm almost on autopilot. right? So you continue down the path, you do what you can do. And when you find yourself in these difficult situations, that's when you really have to tap into pieces of yourself and parts of yourself that you may not actually have, or you may not know that you have. And I think that's where the learning occurs. And for me, it's almost like being a bit of an adrenaline junkie. Certainly not with roller coasters and skydiving, but in this context where it's that excitement and that unknown of, can I do it? And I think if there's something my dad has always said to me, he's like, you can always come home. So each time I moved to a different country, each time I took on a different job or a different project, you can always step back, but you can't necessarily try again later. So I think that's something that I've always lived by, or at least since that time. I'm going to try it, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. I'll try something else. And so this fear of failure that I think so many people do have. I'm perhaps a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity and a little bit more comfortable with failure than perhaps I would have otherwise been if I hadn't gone away or didn't have that mentorship.
And the two sides of the coin of support, where one is, and I also am very grateful and privileged to have a very supportive family structure as well. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea of, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try it because I know that there are other people supporting me if I fail. But the flip side of that coin is, I know I will be okay. I know that I have a certain level of strength. And how are you supposed to know that or cultivate that if you don't? And you can say, oh, I want to cultivate that, because that's that self-support network inside of who you are, and that trust and belief in yourself and who you are. Yeah. You don't know unless it's tested. Faith, what is that? There's a phrase, I'm sure it exists. I'm not sure who said it, but faith is meaningless if not left untested, right?
Absolutely. It's absolutely true that you say that. And I know, so I lived in Germany and went to high school. I worked in France. I worked in Germany again as an ice cream seller one summer. I ended up working for the European Commission in Brussels. I did research on an Aboriginal language in Australia. And I taught English in a language school in South Africa. And because of all of those experiences, when I did move back to Canada, everything that I've done professionally since that point has been drawing from all of those things that I've learned. And when I look at how I was able to build my grit, through those experiences, that I think is what has driven my professional decisions, because I have since worked in international, helping international students come here, helping Canadian students experience life abroad to develop those skills. I want to facilitate that in a way that I didn't have somebody facilitating it for me, because at that time, 20 years ago, there weren't the same programs that exist today. And so I see the value in that. And I want other people to test it. I want our youth to develop those skills because I think they're incredibly valuable. And so that has been the basis of a lot of what I have done since that point.
Wow, look at that. Isn't it funny when I find that every time I talk to people on here and I ask about the progression across the years, starting when you're so young, and it's interesting how you can always find the thread that pulls all the way through. I want to just pick up on two things that you mentioned about how you experienced school as a child before you went to Germany, as a teenager, because I'm curious as to how you look at these now as a practitioner with all of that global worldview experience and perspective that you take. So you said you were shy. You said that you didn't put your hand up much. What do you think how do you think that informs your idea of what engagement should look like in a classroom? Because I find, like, when I talk to practitioners about students being engaged all the time, I feel like they expect a high level of, they're verbose, they're talking a lot in class, and, they're making all these dynamic connections. But you, as someone who is, undeniably intelligent and engaged, as we've talked about, in the learning experience, and that was always interesting to you, but that's not how you participated in the system. So how does how you were then impact how you see engagement now?
Mhm. I feel like there should be a bit of a happy medium. So I think I was on one extreme. And I think if I can say old school learning without aging myself too much, I think it didn't, the opportunities in the classroom, the things that we did, the things that we learned, the activities that we didn't provide enough opportunities for someone as shy as I was to develop the skills that we value so much today, i.e., being engaged in a very vocal way. And I think when I look at my 6-year-old in her classroom in French immersion now, they do presentations every month. And I look at that now as a practitioner in higher education, as somebody who was so incredibly shy and didn't, I struggled so much to develop those skills as an adult. I value so much that's become such an important part of the curriculum and of the primary experience for kids today. So I think things have improved, and I think for young people, I think we're starting to realize some of the skills that are so valued, and we're starting to bring those experiences and learning opportunities into the classroom at an earlier age, because I think it'll make it easier for kids as they grow older. And I think that's something that I missed. But at the same time, I also, I have always had a bit of an inferiority complex. And for those who are louder, those who do speak up more in meetings, those who do raise their hand, I've learned to appreciate the quieter ones, and see that as a strength within myself. Understand that listening is good. Maybe not talking every time something pops into my head is good, because that contribution may not be as valuable as the one coming through in a written format, or in a side comment or a quiet conversation from somebody who's just not ready to speak up in a louder or in a bigger setting. So I've learned to appreciate that.
Yeah,
it absolutely
looking
is.
at it as a skill, just like speaking and being able to articulate your thoughts is a skill.
Absolutely. So I think, I've learned the two things. I've learned to understand and appreciate that about myself and about others. And I've learned that, I think having those experiences early on in life will provide those students who are introverts from an early age to develop what they need, the skills they need to function in a world where engagement is very much seen as being vocal in a classroom or in a company setting.
Well, this is now, because the second thing that I was going to say is, I was also lucky to do well in school as a child, like you. And people will ask me, my mother thought it was fascinating when I was all about systems reform, because she's like, the system was fine for you. Like, why? What is it? What's your problem? What's your beef with the system? And it was, so I'm curious, was it, did you notice, like, when you were in it, even though it worked for you, were you already aware that it didn't work for other people? Or were you aware that it wasn't building those skills? Or was that something that those travel experiences and that encountering of another way of thinking was able to show you?
Yeah. I mean, I think travel certainly helped me see it for the first time. I don't think I really understood that it wasn't working for some groups of people at that early age. But I think when it really solidified for me was when I actually started to work in higher education, because my first experience with working in formal higher education was with the MBA program at Rotman, and then I worked at U of T proper, and then I ended up at Centennial College. And as I started to work with younger and younger students, I realized that they're struggling. They're struggling with so many different pieces. They're struggling with communication. They're struggling with their resilience. They're struggling with the ability to navigate systems. They're struggling with their ability to advocate for themselves. And as I saw that in real time with students that I was meeting with on a daily basis, I realized that the system is failing young people, and that we can create co-curricular programming for students in colleges and universities all we want, but we're getting the problem too late. The real problem is we're not starting this work when they're really young, and giving them the tools that they can practice over years through their elementary and secondary years before they even get to the point where we're testing it in real time.
Well, and now working with an international student population, we have to now also consider cultural diversity, because
Absolutely.
how do we consider student preparedness for some of these key, and I'm also curious as to what you call these skills. I just delivered a workshop on socio-emotional learning and education, process skills, human skills, life skills. I don't know how you qualify them. I'm sure a bit of all those.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we look at the preparedness of students in those skill areas when now you're considering a student demographic that is so diverse,
Mm-hmm.
made up of students coming from different countries outside of Canada, let alone the domestic students that, again, also have a high level of diversity, especially in Canada?
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think having benefited from international education, spent a lot of time abroad. I mean, international is where my heart is. It's woven into the very fabric of my fiber of my being. And so, that was really my focus for a long time. And how do we bring international students into Canada in particular? And how do we bring them up to that level playing field? What are the skills that they need to understand and navigate the Canadian academic and professional landscape successfully? Because ultimately that's what we all want, especially with the postgraduate permit now. We want them to stay. We want them to contribute to the economy. And so, I think for me, it's been about figuring out what their needs are before they ever set foot. And I have an understanding of what their needs are as a former international student myself, and having spent a lot of time working with international students. But also, I think it's important to connect with these international students early to understand what their needs are. And that is about doing a needs assessment before they even set foot in Canada and get them working on it. And I think we started this work even 10, 15 years ago when I was at Rotman, where we had the pre-arrival program. And you might have actually been a part of some of that work, where we were assessing them before they even set foot. So 3 and 4 months ahead, we were taking information about them through assessments, through pre-arrival assignments, and then essentially giving them a professional development prescription that for the month or two before they came. These are the programs that we offer based on what you have done for us already. This is what we recommend. And so they may not be on a level playing field by the time they get to day one of their MBA program, but they're further ahead. And so we can continue the work that we've started. And that's something that we've done at other institutions since that point. I mean, at Centennial, we call it Head Start. I created that 5 years ago. And it's that pre-arrival program to make sure that we are assessing them early on, that we understand what their needs are, and that we're delivering programs that help them personally, academically, professionally. Let's start with personal. Let's get them houses. Let's bring them in and help them understand the financial landscape. Let's get them their immigration papers. Let's make sure that they understand the cultural differences that they're walking into in the Canadian academic environment. Let's help them understand what a Canadian classroom looks like. What is a Canadian workplace? What are their rights and responsibilities? Let's give it to them up front so that they have the entire length of their program to think and work on these things before we're putting them out into the workforce.
And connecting them to that valuable community of support.
Absolutely.
Of other students who are experiencing the same thing as you. Because again, we boil this down to the human element. We are all humans. No matter where you're born on this planet, we do share some common elements in terms of things that make us feel safe.
Absolutely.
Our base instinct reptilian brains, I want to feel like I have a group I'm a part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I understand what could hurt me and what could help me in these environments, right? This is great. So we're going to dive in now to some ways in which these components of education that you've mentioned already, I really want to pull on this thread of needs assessment, onboarding these transitional programs, because I think this is a huge area that a lot of us are dealing with, whether we're talking about transition programs from high school to first year or international students. This idea of people don't have certain skills, or we have skills, some evident skills gaps, or some work we need to do to reskill or upskill.
Yes.
How are we looking at those kinds of transitional programs through a lens of innovation, as well as some of the other these other two elements you've pulled on, which are personalized environments? Like, how do we allow, the quiet learner, the gregarious learner, all the ones in between and around those, how do we provide access and opportunities for them to engage in educational environments? And then lastly, the skills-based structures that you've talked about, because I'm a competency geek. So let's dive more into those now. That's just part one of this exciting conversation, my friends. Click on part two and continue with us on this important journey we like to call the education revolution.